Only the paranoid survive.
Wow.
That's quite a statement to kick things off, isn't it?
It really is powerful. And it's the core idea from Andreas Grove's book, the guy who was CEO of Intel during some pretty transformative times.
Exactly. He steered Intel into becoming this computing giant. So today, we're really digging into his thinking on how businesses, and maybe even us as individuals, navigate these huge radical shifts that seem to happen constantly now.
And Grove, well, he wasn't just theorizing from an ivory tower. He lived through this stuff. His own background, coming to the U.S. as a refugee, his whole experience at Intel. It gives his words real weight. He was right there in the thick of it, making incredibly tough decisions.
Right. So this deep dive isn't just about, how to hang on when things get tough. We want to figure out how you can actually use these moments of massive change to get ahead, to thrive even, based on what Grove learned.
Yeah, and for you listening, if you're someone who wants to grasp these big ideas quickly without getting totally overwhelmed, think of this as like your shortcut. Whether it's your career, your industry, or just plain curiosity about how things work, Grove's ideas offer a really useful way to look at change.
Okay, so let's get into it. One of the absolute core concepts Grove introduces is this idea of strategic inflection points, SIPs, he calls them. And they often happen alongside these 10x forces. What exactly are we talking about here?
Okay, so a strategic inflection point. Picture it like a major turning point, a moment where the fundamental rules of your business or maybe even your career are about to change dramatically.
So it could be amazing
Or it could be the beginning of the end if you miss it or react wrongly. And these SIPs, they're often kicked off by what Grove called 10x forces. We're not talking small incremental tweaks here.
10 times the magnitude?
Exactly, 10 times the impact you're used to dealing with. It could be a new technology bursting onto the scene, a totally unexpected competitor, maybe what your customers want suddenly shifts completely.
Or changes with suppliers. Or even regulations.
Yeah, or suppliers, or complement, or, like how apps make a smartphone more valuable, the ecosystem around you. Or, yes, new regulations. It's a massive force hitting the foundations of your business.
A tenfold shift that really is like an earthquake, not just a tremor. Grove even brings in Schumpeter, right? Talking about how real competition isn't just someone slightly cheaper.
Precisely. Schumpeter's point was that the biggest threats often come from completely new ways of doing things, new tech, new business models that can make your whole existing setup irrelevant.
Not just nibbling at your market share, but potentially wiping it out.
That's the core of a strategic inflection point. And Grove's insight is that businesses don't usually just collapse overnight. Often the failure is in not recognizing these huge shifts early enough. They're too slow, maybe in denial.
And he gives a really powerful example of this with Intel's own experience getting out of the memory chip business back in the 80s. That sounds like a classic SIP story.
Oh, it's a perfect case study. Early 80s, Intel was the memory company, a pioneer. But then they started facing this overwhelming competition from Japanese manufacturers.
We're making chips that were better, cheaper.
Both. Higher quality and significantly lower cost. It was a massive challenge.
I bet there was some denial at first. Like, no way, we're Intel, we invented this stuff.
Absolutely. Grove talks about that initial phase of disbelief. He mentions these almost scary reports coming back from Intel employees visiting Japanese plants, huge facilities, totally focused on memory, working way ahead on future generations. It was a scale Intel just wasn't matching at that point.
Wow, that's confronting. But like you said earlier, Grove himself wrote, memories were us. That was their identity. If you even contemplate walking away from the very thing that defines you.
It was incredibly painful, emotionally charged. It meant questioning everything Intel stood for. Grove mentions a really critical conversation, probably with Gordon Moore, that was key to finally accepting that they had to make a radical shift. And the lesson there for you is always being willing to question your own core identity, what you think your business is.
Okay, so they finally see it. It's a true SIP. But actually doing something about it, that can't have been easy. It's not like flipping a switch.
Not even close. Grove really stresses that navigating a SIP is this long, torturous struggle. It's not a single decision point. There's huge internal resistance, especially from the memory division itself.
Understandably.
Yeah. And interestingly, Grove points out that the big shift in resources didn't happen because of some grand top-down order initially. It was more the result of countless daily decisions by middle managers.
How so?
They were just looking at profitability. They naturally started allocating more production capacity to the microprocessors, which were booming, and less to the memory chips, which were losing money. It was almost organic, driven by the numbers on the ground.
So the strategic realization at the top was crucial, but the actual execution was driven by those practical day-to-day choices. And it took, what, 3 years?
A full 3 years, Grove says, to completely get out of memories and get back to solid profitability. It really shows SIP isn't an event, it's a process, a long, tough transition period.
Right, a sustained transformation.
Exactly. And this whole internal Intel drama was happening just as the entire computer industry was hitting its own massive inflection point, moving away from the old vertical model.
Where companies like IBM basically controlled everything, hardware, software, the whole stack.
Right. To a horizontal model, really kicking off after IBM chose Intel microprocessors for the first PC around 1981.
And that horizontal structure changed everything, didn't it? Grove talks about how whoever wins in one key layer, like microprocessors for Intel, gains enormous power.
Huge leverage, because in a horizontal industry, everyone specializes. If you dominate a fundamental layer like the processor, then the computer makers, the operating system guys, they all become dependent on you. It shifts the power dynamics completely.
Fascinating how these shifts play out. And Grove also points to what happens when companies just miss these SIPs or refuse to see them. He mentions the silent film industry ignoring sound, or IBM blaming the economy when the PC was taking over.
Classic denial. It happens all the time. Success breeds complacency, right? Companies get comfortable, they think their way is the only way, they explain away the warning signs, underestimate the new thing, until it's too late.
It's so easy to see how that happens. But a question that comes up for me is, how do you tell the difference? How do you know if it's a real 10x shift, a true SIP, versus just, the normal ups and downs of the market? What's signal and what's noise?
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it? And Grove admits it's incredibly difficult. There's no magic formula. He talks about listening to the Cassandras, the people on the edges, the ones who seem a bit paranoid, who are picking up on weird signals. But it requires intense debate, looking at data differently. Maybe you're running experiments. But critically, it requires leaders to be open to hearing bad news, to challenging the status quo, not shutting down dissent.
Which brings us nicely to another big idea from Grove.
Yeah.
This concept of paranoia. Now, he doesn't mean actual clinical paranoia, right?
No, not at all. It's business paranoia. It's about cultivating a constant state of alertness, a healthy skepticism, thinking like a guardian, always watching for potential threats. It links back to another great Grove quote. Business success contains the seeds of its own destruction.
Meaning the moment you get successful, you become a target.
Exactly. Complacency sets in, you get maybe a bit arrogant, you stop paying attention, and someone else is always hungry, always looking for a way to disrupt you. This paranoia is the antidote. It keeps you scanning the horizon, questioning assumptions, asking, how could we get blindsided here?
And Intel definitely needed that vigilance, even at their peak, didn't they? The Pentium chip crisis in '94 must have been a huge shock.
Oh, absolutely. Intel was flying high. Intel Inside was everywhere. Then, boom, this flaw is discovered in the Pentium processor's floating point unit. A technical glitch, but it hit right when they seemed untouchable.
And their initial reaction wasn't great, was it?
No, they seriously underestimated it. Their first policy was basically, we'll only replace the chip if you can prove you're doing super complex math where this tiny error might matter. For most people, they said it was irrelevant.
Which sounds incredibly dismissive to the average person buying a computer.
Totally. And it just blew up. The media jumped on it. The early internet forums went crazy with complaints and anger. People started making jokes about Intel Inside, like it was a defect label. It really started to hurt their image.
Yeah, the jokes were always a bad sign. And then IBM stepped in.
That was the killer blow. IBM, a massive customer and partner, announced they were halting all shipments of computers with Pentium chips. That sent shockwaves. The pressure on Intel became immense.
So they had to back down.
Completely. They did a total 180. They announced they would replace any Pentium chip for any customer who asked, no questions asked. A huge reversal.
That must have cost a fortune.
Financially, yes. A $475 million write-off, which was staggering back then. But the bigger cost, or maybe the bigger lesson, was realizing the rules had changed. Intel couldn't just dictate quality standards anymore.
Because the end users, the actual people buying the PCs, suddenly had a voice. Through the media, the internet.
Exactly. They realized they had a direct relationship with millions of end users now, not just the PC manufacturers. Consumer perception mattered immensely. They had to listen and respond in a totally new way. Now, thinking about that initial response, just replacing chips for the high-end math users, you can kind of see the financial logic, right? Saving money. So how should companies weigh that? the cost versus the potential hit to their reputation.
That's a tough balancing act.
It really is. Grove's experience suggests that in the face of a potential crisis of confidence, especially one amplified by modern media, being overly focused on short-term cost savings can be disastrously short-sighted. The reputational damage can far outweigh the replacement costs. Transparency and taking responsibility quickly often end up being the smarter, though maybe more expensive initially, route.
So the Pentium crisis, while obviously incredibly painful for Intel, ended up being another kind of inflection point for them, teaching them about this new era of consumer power.
Absolutely. It drove home that complacency is dangerous, even when you're dominant. Unexpected things happen, and how you respond matters. A lot. It reinforces that need for constant vigilance, that paranoia.
Okay, so we've talked corporations, industries, but Grove takes these ideas right down to the personal level, to our careers.
He really does. He says flat out, the lessons of dealing with strategic inflection points are similar whether you're dealing with a company or your own career. It's a direct parallel.
In his line, your career is literally your business. You own it as a sole proprietor. That really reframes things.
It puts the responsibility squarely on you. You have to manage your career like a CEO manages a company. You need to be aware of the shifts in your field, your industry. Are your skills still in demand? What new skills are emerging? Who are your competitors? What are the potential 10x forces that could disrupt your professional life? Just like Intel had that memory is us blind spot, what assumptions might you hold about your career that could be dangerous?
That's a powerful thought. You have to be your own early warning system.
Exactly. You can't just put your head down and assume doing good work is enough if the whole landscape is changing around you.
He uses an example of a banker, right?
Yeah.
Someone who navigated a couple of these personal SFPs.
Yeah, it's a great little story. This guy was a banker, then made what seemed like a good move into being a stockbroker. But then along comes online brokerage, Charles Schwab, E-Trade, all that, a classic 10x force, totally changing the game for traditional stockbrokers.
Right. Suddenly, individuals could trade stocks much cheaper, bypassing the traditional broker model.
Exactly. This guy saw his profession was under serious threat. But the key thing is, he didn't just wait for the axe to fall. He had an interest in writing, so while he was still working as a broker, he started exploring that. He used his financial knowledge to transition into business journalism.
So he saw the writing on the wall and started building an escape route before his current job disappeared. That proactive experimentation seems vital.
It's crucial, and Grove acknowledges the emotional side, too. It's hard. There's denial. Maybe this online thing is just a fad. There's the pain of letting go of years invested in a certain path. It's tough.
Yeah, leaving behind something you've built, even if it's facing challenges.
But Grove makes the sobering point. These big environmental shifts in careers, they don't care how good you are at your current job. Being the best travel agent in 1995 didn't stop the internet from changing that industry forever. Excellence in a declining field isn't enough.
Oof. That's blunt, but probably true. Your skills might become less valuable through no fault of your own.
Precisely. So the takeaway is clear. Constant self-assessment, be willing to learn new things, and have the courage to make a change, to pivot when you see those big forces reshaping your professional world.
Okay, so wrapping this all up, Grove's message, only the paranoid survive. It's not about neurotic fear. It sounds much more like active awareness, proactive adaptation.
I think that's exactly right. It's about cultivating vigilance, critical thinking, and a real willingness to change course when necessary, whether you're running Intel or just managing your own career path in this crazy, fast-changing world.
And the key tools he gives us are understanding these strategic inflection points, spotting those potentially huge 10x forces.
Learning how to separate the real signals from all the background noise, which, as we discussed, is hard.
Right. And fostering debate, being willing to experiment, and then having the clarity and courage to act decisively when a change of direction is truly needed. We talked about signal versus noise for Intel with the Pentium flaw. How do they actually sort through that? All the online chatter versus real customer pain?
Well, initially they didn't do it well, right? They dismissed much of it. But ultimately, the signal became overwhelming. Key customers like IBM acting, the sheer volume and consistency of the complaints across different channels, press, online, direct calls, the damage to the brand measured by sentiment. It eventually broke through the internal filters. It highlights the need for diverse listening posts, not just relying on your established channels. You need to be tuned in to those newer, maybe messier communication streams too.
Makes sense. You need multiple inputs.
Yes. These concepts are the toolkit for getting through what Grove calls the valley of death, that dangerous transition period during a SEP. It takes that mix of awareness, hard thinking, and action.
So the final thought to leave you, our listener, with is this. What might be the 10x forces brewing in your world right now? In your industry, your company, even your specific role or skill set? Are there any faint whispers on the edges that might hint at a fundamental shift coming? Grove's work really pushes us to think proactively, to try and shape our future rather than just reacting when change hits us. Ask yourself, what are those whispers telling me?